Have you ever wondered what separates the greatest investors in history from everyone else? Not just in terms of money and returns, but in the way they think, the way they live, and the way they understand the world around them. Most people assume it comes down to secret information, insider knowledge, or some kind of superhuman intellect that ordinary people simply don't possess. That's what financial journalist William Green assumed too when he first started interviewing the legends of investing. But after 20 years of sitting across from the greatest minds in the investment world, he discovered something that completely changed his perspective. The secrets behind their success had almost nothing to do with stock picking. They were secrets for living. Richer, Wiser, Happier was published in 2021, and it is not a book about how to buy stocks or predict market movements. It is a book about how to think. It's about intellectual discipline, about the architecture of good decisions, and about building a life of genuine meaning. Green spent 20 years interviewing people like Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger, Howard Marks, Joel Greenblatt, Sir John Templeton, Monish Pabrai, and many others. What he found astonished him. These people had developed ways of thinking, patterns of behavior, and philosophies of life that made them not just richer financially, but wiser and happier than the vast majority of human beings. Today, we're going to take a long, deep journey through this remarkable book. We'll uncover the profound lessons Green extracted from these extraordinary minds, and we'll see how these lessons can transform the way we think, the decisions we make, and the lives we build, even if we know absolutely nothing about financial markets. Let's begin with the man many consider the greatest investor in history, Warren Buffett. When people try to explain Buffett's success, they reach for the easy answers: extraordinary intelligence, perfect timing, dumb luck. But Green reveals something different when he spends time with Buffett and the people who've worked alongside him for decades. The first and largest secret isn't genius. It's something far simpler and far deeper at the same time. It's reading. Buffett spends between 5 and 6 hours every single day reading. 5 to 6 hours. Every day. For more than 70 years. When you add those hours up, you realize you're looking at a person who has spent tens of thousands of hours absorbing knowledge and building a profound understanding of the business world. All that reading produces all that knowledge, and all that knowledge produces all that wisdom. But the volume of reading alone doesn't tell the whole story. What matters equally is what Buffett reads and how he engages with it. Buffett doesn't spend his days reading financial news so he can react to the latest headlines. Buffett reads annual reports in extraordinary depth. He reads economic history. He reads biographies of great business leaders. He reads philosophy and science. From this vast and varied reading, he builds an enormous knowledge base that allows him to see patterns and connections that are invisible to people who only consume the daily financial noise. This leads us to the first real lesson of this book. Genuine wealth begins with intellectual wealth. The person who reads widely and thinks deeply will see opportunities that are completely invisible to the person who only follows the trending headlines and social media feeds. But there's another stunning quality in Buffett's character that Green reveals, one that surprises almost everyone when they first encounter it. Buffett spends most of his time doing nothing. He reads, he thinks, and he waits. He waits for the perfect opportunity that genuinely deserves his capital. And when that opportunity finally arrives, he moves with overwhelming conviction and force. Green calls this the activity of inactivity, and it is one of the most difficult things to practice in investing and in life alike. Most of us feel deeply uncomfortable when we're not busy. We feel the relentless pressure to act, to decide, to change, to move. Buffett teaches us that sometimes the most productive thing you can possibly do is nothing at all, and that waiting patiently for the right moment is a profound form of discipline, not laziness. This lesson has powerful applications far beyond investing. How many times have you made a rushed decision about a relationship, a job, or a project because you couldn't tolerate the discomfort of uncertainty and waiting? How many times have you abandoned a long-term investment in something valuable because you desperately wanted immediate results? Patience is not weakness. It is one of the most powerful weapons in the arsenal of the truly great. From Buffett, we move to his closest intellectual partner, a figure the book portrays in remarkable detail: Charlie Munger. Munger, the vice chairman of Berkshire Hathaway, is perhaps the most systematically comprehensive mind in the history of modern investing. What makes Munger exceptional isn't his knowledge of financial markets. It's his philosophy of thinking, which he calls the big mental models. Munger's idea is simple in principle, but staggeringly deep in practice. If you want to understand reality and make genuinely good decisions, you cannot limit yourself to a single framework or a single discipline. The person who knows only economics will interpret everything through an economic lens. The person who knows only psychology will interpret everything through a psychological lens. But reality is complex and deeply interconnected, and it demands multiple lenses from multiple disciplines to be understood honestly and completely. Over his entire lifetime, Munger deliberately built what he describes as a latticework of mental models, a collection of the most important principles and big ideas extracted from physics, psychology, biology, history, mathematics, economics, and philosophy. When he faces a difficult problem or a major decision, he applies these different models to it in sequence, examining the situation from multiple angles simultaneously. Take just one of these models, the model of inversion, drawn from mathematics. Munger's famous advice is always to invert. Instead of asking, "How do I succeed in this investment?" ask yourself, what would guarantee that this investment fails completely? Instead of asking, "How do I become a great manager?" ask, what are all the things that would make someone the worst manager in history? This inversion reveals dangers and pitfalls that you would never have noticed if you only thought in the conventional forward direction. Another of Munger's celebrated mental models comes from behavioral psychology, the catalog of cognitive biases. Munger believes with great conviction that the biggest enemies of wisdom are not ignorance, but the illusions and biases we refuse to acknowledge in ourselves. We all tend to see what we want to see. We all tend to believe what confirms our existing beliefs and reject the evidence that challenges them. Munger spends enormous intellectual energy guarding against these mental traps. In practice, this means he always searches actively for the reasons he might be wrong, not just the reasons he's right. Imagine applying this principle to your own important decisions. Before you commit to something significant, genuinely search for all the evidence that you might be making a mistake. Find the smartest critics of your idea and listen to them with real openness. This practice is painful for the ego, but it saves you from catastrophically expensive errors over the long run. What we learn from Munger extends far beyond finance. We all need to develop diverse mental models drawn from different disciplines to understand the world around us with greater clarity and honesty. The person who reads history and philosophy and psychology and science will make dramatically better decisions than the person who reads only within their narrow specialty. We turn the page now to a different kind of character, brilliant in his own distinct way. Howard Marks, the founder of Oak Tree Capital and the author of the most widely read investment memos in all of Wall Street. Marx is famous for his memos to clients, which have become philosophical essays read and discussed at the highest levels of global finance. What does Marx teach us? He teaches a lesson of fundamental importance about the nature of cycles and uncertainty. Markets move in cycles. Economies move in cycles. Human beings behave in repetitive patterns. Greed replaces fear, then fear replaces greed, endlessly and predictably. Marx sees the single biggest mistake most people make as the belief that current conditions will last forever. When markets are rising, people convince themselves they'll rise forever and forget the laws of gravity. When they're falling, people convince themselves they'll fall forever and forget the forces of recovery. Marx calls his central framework second-level thinking. First-level thinking says, this is a great company, I'll buy its stock. Second-level thinking says, this is a great company, but does everyone already know it's great? Does the current price already reflect all of this optimism? What happens if the results are good but don't quite match what the market was expecting? Second-level thinking means always asking, and then what? And then what after that, before you commit to any significant decision? What will others do in response to this move? How will this look in a year or in 10 years? What could go wrong with the assumption I'm currently treating as obvious? Applying this lesson to everyday life can be genuinely transformative. Before any major decision in your career or your personal life, step back and ask, what are the second-order consequences of this choice? Who will be affected in ways I haven't considered yet? What is the worst plausible scenario, and am I genuinely prepared to handle it if it arrives? Perhaps the deepest lesson Marx offers, though, is the lesson of intellectual humility. In a world overflowing with confident voices who predict the future of markets with absolute certainty, Marx constantly insists that nobody knows. Nobody knows where the market will be tomorrow. Nobody knows exactly when the next crisis will begin or end, and the person who claims perfect certainty is almost always a person who doesn't know what they don't know. This intellectual humility is not a weakness. It's a fortress that protects its owner from the blind overconfidence that leads to catastrophe. We go deeper now, to a figure who may be less famous than Buffett and Munger, but carries lessons every bit as profound. Joel Greenblatt, the author of The Little Book That Beats the Market, and the manager of one of the most extraordinary investment track records in history. What Green reveals through his conversations with Greenblatt is a devastating lesson about the gap between intellectual wisdom and emotional wisdom. Greenblatt developed a relatively simple mathematical formula for investing and proved conclusively that it outperforms the market over long periods. But when he made this formula available to ordinary investors to apply themselves, he discovered something shocking. Most of them sold at exactly the wrong moments. The formula was correct, but human beings couldn't stick to it because their emotions kept overriding their judgment. This is one of the most important revelations in the entire book because it reaches far beyond investing and into every corner of our lives. Most of us already know what we should be doing. We know we should exercise, eat well, sleep enough, invest for the long term, spend more quality time with the people we love. Knowledge is not the problem. The problem is the vast canyon between knowing and doing, and that canyon is built from emotions, biases, and psychological traps that take control of us in moments of pressure, fear, and temptation. What we learn from Greenblatt is that real wisdom doesn't just mean knowing the right answer. It means possessing the emotional capacity to act on it, even when doing so is painful and frightening. And that requires continuous practice in self-discipline, honest study of your own biases, and the construction of systems and habits that protect you from your worst decisions in your weakest moments. We arrive now at one of the most moving chapters in the entire book. the chapter devoted to Sir John Templeton. Templeton, who passed away in 2008, leaving behind both an enormous fortune and an enduring legacy, is perhaps the most original investor in the book. And his fame wasn't built only on extraordinary investment returns. It was built on a philosophy of life that transcended money by a vast distance. Templeton believed in a principle that sounds simple on the surface, but is almost impossibly difficult to execute. Go to where pessimism is greatest and look for opportunity there. In the investment world, this meant buying when everyone else was selling in fear. In life, it means looking for value and possibility in the places everyone else has abandoned. But the most compelling dimension of Templeton's character isn't his investment methodology. It's his deep integration of spirituality and ethics into every aspect of his professional life. Templeton began every investment meeting with a group prayer. He believed that genuine humility before the vastness of the universe and an honest acknowledgement of the limits of human knowledge was the very foundation of clear thinking. Before any major decision, he asked himself, "Does this decision reflect my highest values and the best of what I am?" Green reveals that Templeton lived in a sustained state of genuine gratitude. Not the performative gratitude that fills social media posts, but a deep, lived appreciation for every detail of his existence. Templeton saw each small, ordinary thing as a gift that warranted real thanks. And he insisted that this gratitude was not merely a pleasant emotional posture. It had direct practical effects on the quality of his thinking and his decisions. The genuinely grateful person sees reality with greater clarity. The genuinely grateful person doesn't need to escape life through numbing distractions or endless consumption. The genuinely grateful person can tolerate uncertainty because their inner security doesn't depend on external circumstances. This is what allowed Templeton to make bold, courageous decisions during the most terrifying moments of global financial crisis. We meet another distinctive personality now, someone whose story Green follows with particular affection. Mohnish Pabrai, the American investor of Indian origin who built his fortune from scratch and became one of the people closest to Buffett's orbit. What's fascinating about Pabrai is his unapologetic philosophy of conscious cloning. Pabrai openly and proudly admits that he copies from the best. He studied Buffett and Munger in exhaustive depth and applied their philosophy in complete detail, rather than trying to reinvent the wheel with an entirely original approach. This leads to a lesson that cuts directly against a piece of contemporary wisdom that elevates originality and looks down on imitation. Copying from the best is not cheating. It is practical intelligence. Templeton himself said that the easiest way to improve your record is to look at what successful people do and then do it. Biological evolution works largely through copying and adaptation. Successful businesses routinely copy proven models and improve on them incrementally. Why would we deprive ourselves of this highly effective strategy in our own lives? Find the person whose life, career, relationships, thinking, or health you genuinely admire. Study what they do in real detail, then copy it deliberately. This is not a loss of identity. It is the fastest path to becoming what you want to become. But Pabrai's story doesn't end there. The deeper and more remarkable part of his journey is how he transformed from someone financially successful to someone living with profound meaning. After a financial crisis that cost him a large portion of his fund's value, Pabrai went through a period of deep reflection and radical reassessment, and he emerged from it with a conviction that has guided him ever since. The highest purpose of life is not accumulating wealth. It is adding value to others and leaving a positive legacy. Pabrai began giving away a large portion of his wealth to educational initiatives,
not only from religious or social obligation, but because he discovered empirically that giving generates a kind of inner happiness that financial gains simply cannot produce. This discovery changed not just his philanthropic activities, but the entire orientation of his life.
We reach now one of the most practically relevant sections of the book, the section that deals with how these extraordinary people approach the relentless flood of information in the modern world. One of the most striking qualities shared by nearly all these great investors is their exceptional ability to separate signal from noise. We live in an era of unprecedented information overflow. Every minute produces thousands of reports, analyses, tweets, and articles claiming to carry the essential insight that will change your understanding of everything. And the uncomfortable truth that green surfaces is that most of this information isn't just unhelpful, it's actively harmful. Buffett says plainly that reading daily financial news makes you a worse investor, not a better one. Why? Because daily news is designed by its very nature to trigger intense emotions, fear, greed, outrage. And these emotions are the enemies of rational judgment. The breaking headline screaming "Markets in free fall" demands an immediate emotional response, which is precisely what most ordinary investors provide, selling at the bottom in fear and buying at the top in greed. The exceptional investor learns to insulate himself from these emotional tidal waves and searches instead for the deep structural realities that don't change with each new news cycle. The time and mental energy these great investors save by not chasing the noise, they reinvest in deep, uninterrupted thinking about the genuinely important questions. This extended time for reflection is the fuel that makes their decisions so much deeper and longer-sighted than those made by people perpetually overwhelmed by the flood of information.
This brings us naturally to a crucial idea that runs through the book like a spine: decision systems. What Green observes across all these exceptional investors is that they don't rely primarily on moment-to-moment intuition when making their most important choices. They rely on what might be called decision systems, collections of explicit principles and criteria that they establish in advance and commit to following when the moment of decision arrives. Buffett has explicit criteria for what qualifies as an investment worth making. Marx has specific questions he asks himself before every significant move. What makes these systems so valuable is precisely that they serve their owner best in the hardest moments, the moments when emotions are running highest and the capacity for clear thinking is most compromised.
The practical application outside investing looks something like this. Decide in advance, while you are calm and clear-headed, what you will do in certain scenarios. What will you do if you lose your job? What will you do if a business partner proposes something ethically questionable? Will act with dramatically more wisdom and composure than the person who encounters them as complete surprises in moments of high stress. There is also what some of these investors call the newspaper test. Before any significant decision, ask yourself, would I be comfortable if this decision were reported on the front page of a widely read newspaper, in front of my family, my friends, my colleagues, and everyone I respect? Could I explain and defend it easily to any person whose judgment I value? This simple test filters out a surprising number of decisions that seem acceptable in the heat of the moment, but don't survive exposure to daylight.
The book also illuminates with great richness the value of what might be called intellectual companionship. One of the most striking patterns in the careers of these great investors is that almost none of them succeeded alone. Buffett and Munger's partnership has transcended business to become one of the deepest intellectual friendships in the history of modern enterprise. Each sees in the other an honest mirror that reflects their thinking and challenges their assumptions. This points to an important psychological truth. The human mind, left to itself, naturally drifts towards confirming its existing beliefs and avoiding challenges to them. We gravitate towards people who share our views and validate what we already think. This is emotionally comfortable, but intellectually dangerous. The person who surrounds himself only with agreement misses enormous opportunities for correction and growth. What distinguishes Buffett and Munger is that across their decades together, they were never afraid to disagree with each other directly and forcefully. Munger famously told Buffett, "You're wrong about this," on many occasions, and Buffett would listen and genuinely reconsider. This kind of intellectual friendship is rare and precious, and it is also something that can be consciously and deliberately built. Look in your own life for the person you can speak to with complete honesty, who challenges your ideas without attacking you personally, who sees your blind spots without being your enemy. Someone whose intelligence you trust and whose care for your well-being is not in doubt. Someone who makes you think more clearly and more deeply after every conversation. That person is worth more to your development than dozens of books and courses and seminars.
Green also examines, across several compelling portraits, the concept of what he calls return on time as distinct from return of money. One of the investors he profiles most memorably is Nick Sleep, a British investor who closed his fund at the height of its success and retreated to a simpler life, driven by a single question: how do I extract the highest possible return from every hour of my existence? Sleep decided that the path to maximum return on time was the ruthless elimination of everything that added little genuine value. He stopped following daily financial news because he realized it consumed enormous time and contributed almost nothing real. He stopped attending unnecessary meetings. He concentrated on a very small number of investments he understood with extreme depth, rather than spreading his attention across dozens of superficially appealing opportunities. And he found that this radical focus produced results that far exceeded what he achieved when he was following the endless stream of information and reacting to every new development. This lesson applies to our entire lives with startling directness. How many hours every day do you spend on activities that you know in your deepest self add no real value to your life? Repetitive news consumption, aimless scrolling through social media, long meetings that could have been a brief email, conversations that neither nourish nor inspire. What if you redirected that time to one large thing you genuinely want to build? What if instead of 2 hours a day on digital platforms, you gave those 2 hours to the project you keep dreaming about? In a single year, you would have spent more than 700 hours building that project. 700 hours of focused effort can launch a business, master a skill, write a book, build a relationship, or transform a life.
We arrive now at what might be the most honest and searching chapter in the entire book. The chapter where Green confronts a question that makes most people uncomfortable. Does becoming wealthy actually make you happy? The answer he receives from the wealthiest people he has ever met is a complex and, in some ways, startling one. Yes, money solves many problems, but beyond a level of wealth that provides genuine security, freedom from daily financial anxiety, and the ability to meet your real needs, additional money adds less to your happiness than almost anyone expects before they have it. What Green finds in the happiest of these exceptional investors is that the real sources of their contentment are not their bank balances. They are something else entirely. The first source is deep absorption in work they genuinely love. Buffett has described going to his office each morning as cap dancing to work. Munger, well into his 90s, still spent hours every day reading, thinking, and wrestling with complex intellectual problems. This total immersion in work that provokes genuine curiosity and demands real skill creates what psychologists call a state of flow, one of the most powerful and reliable experiences of human happiness.
The second source is autonomy and freedom. These highly successful investors prize their complete control over their time and decisions above almost everything else. They are not required to do anything they don't believe in. They choose who they work with, when they work, and what they work on. This reminds us that genuine happiness requires consciously building our lives to maximize our independence and our ability to act from our own values. The third source, and perhaps the most surprising given how these men are typically portrayed in the media, is deep relationships. One of the most striking findings in the book is that among the wealthiest people Green interviewed, those who report the highest levels of happiness consistently point not to their fortunes, but to their closest relationships, their marriages, their deep friendships, their intellectual partnerships. This aligns perfectly with what decades of psychological research confirms. The quality of our relationships is the single strongest predictor of our happiness, our health, and the length of our lives. The fourth source is gratitude and meaning. The happiest of these investors are those who found a source of meaning in their lives that extends beyond financial success. Templeton found his meaning in the spiritual and scientific exploration of the deepest mysteries of existence. Pabrai found his in educating future generations and building institutions that change the lives of thousands of children. Without meaning that transcends money, financial success tends to feel hollow once it has been achieved.
After this long and rich journey through the minds of the greatest investors William Green has ever encountered, we arrive at what might be called the grand synthesis. What did these extraordinary individuals share? What were the common threads woven through all of their personalities and careers? The first thread Green sees with unmistakable clarity is exceptional patience. Not the passive patience of tolerating waiting with discomfort, but the active patience of deep confidence that time is your ally, not your enemy. Every single one of these investors resisted the enormous pressure from their environment to make short-term decisions and consistently chose what was right over the long run over what was comfortable in the short term. The second thread is what Green calls intellectual humility. Buffett, Munger, Marx, Templeton, and all the others share an honest acknowledgement of the limits of their knowledge and their ability to predict the future. They do not claim certainty about what cannot be known, and this protects them from the overconfident errors that destroy so many promising careers and so many promising lives.
The third thread is their genuine obsession with their work. These people do not work for money. They already have more than they could possibly spend in 100 lifetimes. They work because the work itself provokes in them an endless curiosity and a deep joy that they find nowhere else. And this explains why Buffett kept working into his 90s and Munger kept reading and thinking until the very end of his life. The fourth thread is voracious, wide-ranging, lifelong reading. Without a single exception, every one of these extraordinary people has read compulsively across diverse fields throughout their entire lives. Reading is not a hobby for them. It is the foundation of how they think. The fifth thread is clarity of values. Each of them has an explicit, deeply rooted value system that guides their decisions. And this clarity simplifies life enormously. When you know precisely what you believe and what you care about, most decisions become far easier because you have a reliable internal compass to navigate by.
Before we close, there is one more idea from the book that deserves to stand on its own, because it changes how you see everything else. Green notices across his decades of conversations with these extraordinary people something that cuts against almost every assumption our culture holds about success and happiness. When he asks these men what genuinely makes their lives feel worth living, the answers are remarkably consistent and remarkably ordinary. A morning coffee with the person they love most, an absorbing book on a quiet evening, a deep conversation with an old friend, working on an intellectual puzzle that still has no known answer, watching the moment of discovery light up in a student's eyes.
None of these things can be purchased with $1 billion, any more than they can be purchased with $100. And this may be the single most important and most urgent lesson in everything we have explored together today. The richest life is not the life with the largest number. It is the life with the deepest engagement, the clearest purpose, the most genuine connections, and the most honest relationship with reality.
So, after everything we've explored today, after all these miles traveled through the minds of the greatest investors in history, let us gather what we're taking with us. Invest in your knowledge before anything else. Read widely and across many different fields. Build a library of mental models drawn from disciplines that at first glance seem to have nothing to do with your life. Every book you read today is a weapon you'll use in an important decision tomorrow or 10 years from now. Learn the art of waiting. Do not confuse activity with productivity. Sometimes the wisest decision is the decision not to act when the evidence isn't clear and the opportunity isn't compelling. Real patience is not passivity. It is the confidence that you will recognize the right moment when it truly arrives. Build your circle of competence deliberately and honestly. Work with intensity and depth within it, and have the courage to admit freely and without shame what lies outside it. Never act in domains you don't genuinely understand, driven by greed or by fear of missing out.
Learn to recognize your own cognitive biases. We all have illusions and blind spots that distort our perception of reality. The wise person knows their biases and builds systems and habits to protect against them. They do not pretend to be immune. Remember always that money is a means, not an end. The deeper goal is to build a life in which you feel genuinely absorbed in meaningful work, authentically free in your choices, deeply connected to the people you love, and honestly grateful for what you have. These are the true sources of happiness that no bank balance alone can ever provide. Treat losses and mistakes as teachers, not as verdicts. Every failure carries a lesson. The difference between those who ultimately succeed and those who give up is not the absence of failure. It is the capacity to extract the lesson and keep moving. And do not defer your real life to some future moment when the wealth you're chasing will finally arrive. Build habits and relationships and meaning right now, in this moment, with the resources you already possess today.
The richest, wisest, and happiest people William Green spent 20 years studying were not great because they were born different from the rest of us. They were great because they made specific choices consistently over long periods of time. They chose curiosity over certainty. They chose honesty over comfort. They chose depth over distraction. They chose meaning over mere accumulation. These choices are available to every single one of us, starting today. The question I'll leave you with is this: which one of these lessons is speaking most directly to your life right now? Which small, concrete change will you actually make starting tomorrow? Because wisdom that never becomes action is just very expensive entertainment. And a small change maintained consistently is what builds, over time, the difference between the life you're dreaming of and the life you're actually living. Share your answer in the comments, and if this summary gave you something real to think about, pass it along to someone who needs it. I'll see you in the next one.